everyone. Welcome to the Graduate College's workshop on communicating effectively with your mentor or advisor. And we're going to get started, so if everyone could please take a moment to introduce yourselves.
I will. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good.
Good. I am Dr. Watson. I'm Associate Dean in the Associate Dean over Academic and Professional Programs in the College of Education. And I'm a Professor of Higher Education.
Hello. Greetings, everybody. My name is Levent Atisi. I'm an Associate Professor in the Department of Anthropology. I'm also my department's graduate coordinator. So.
Good. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Janet Dufek. I am Associate Dean of the School of Allied Health Sciences. I'm the Director of the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences PhD program, and I'm also a Graduate Faculty Fellow this year. So welcome and pleased that you're here. So what we thought we'd do is open this up with questions that you might have and actually try to have an interactive discussion. So no question's a stupid question. We hope that our answers are not stupid.
I know.
Yeah,
or
it's on
misleading.
the house, right?
So with that, I don't know, does anyone have anything else to say on the panel first before opening things up?
I think it would be wise to keep this as an informal chattering rather than us talking to you. Right? You just try.
What are the duties of a mentor, and what are the things that a mentee can expect to receive from a mentor?
Sure. Okay, I'll start. The duties of a mentor, from my perspective, is to produce a graduate student, especially a doctoral student, who is wiser and smarter and better than me. If I don't do that, I haven't produced the product, right? So how is that done might be the question that you're looking for an answer for. I'll give some of my ideas and then allow my colleagues to add on to that. There's obviously a need to share technical expertise, didactic expertise, not only to share what you know, but to lead to sources of new information and to expand upon what is commonly known and to understand where to find other answers. The mentor's role is to guide. It's not to do, it's to guide. And in my opinion, and I'm not going to take all the answers, I have one more thing and then I'll pass it along, is to be an active, considerate listener. Get to know your mentee, their strengths, their weaknesses, and try to augment those strengths and even reduce those weaknesses and shift them over to the strength side. So, other things to add?
Yeah, I would actually probably, say your first name.
Finished it.
Finished it. I encourage my students to take a step back. So before you ask me, what I'm going to give you is to establish what it is you need. So I think there's a term in management called managing up, right? So I would encourage you all to think about yourselves as mentees from that framework, managing up. And by that I mean be intentional with who you identify to be your mentors. So plural, right? So develop a team. Don't just have one. We're all going to be scholars. Triangulate your data. And so you do that with multiple sources, right? So establish a team. But I think the first thing, there's a couple things, and then I'll turn it over, that I ask my students, or have asked my students to do. I have my last one graduating in December. Sad. Is I identify what your short-term and long-term goals are, both professionally and personally. Because you as graduate students, I'm going to tell you something you already know, you're living it, you have competing priorities, right? And so we have this narrative of balance. There's no such thing. Balance is a dynamic. And so I ask my students to identify what is your first year, end of your first year, what do you hope personally and professionally? And what is your professional goals for 1 year, and then at 2 years and 3 years. So I think that's really important because that's going to help you establish values clarification and what it is you need. And then that helps me in terms of the interactions.
And I would like to distinguish between mentors and advisors, because we all assume that we have mentors, but I think there's a significant difference between the two. An advisor is your academic partner, right? And that person coaches you and helps you with like meeting, milestone, the coursework and all those things. So most of the tangibles, and your relationship with your advisor or advisors might be impersonal, right? It's more professional and it's closed-ended, right? You graduate and that relation ends. But a mentor is a different person with whom you have actually a lifelong, long-term relationship, and that relationship is personal and it's beyond your academic progress, right? And I think at the most fundamental level, I describe a mentor as a person who is genuinely interested in your well-being as a human being, right? And I was lucky because I had a mentor, but I know that a lot of people actually end up in situations where they have advisors. So, but it's up to you. If you identify, and again, goes to your point, multiple people, build a team, I'd seek out. So that would be the first.
When mentoring an undergraduate student, in a project that involves collaboration, so scholarly work, is there a proper division of labor, or a more rigid division of labor that one should follow? So, for example, if there is a research initiative involved, the graduate student is contributing to this initiative. However, within, let's say, the methodological section, the undergraduate student is not up to speed with the advanced levels of methods. Does the mentor the mentor has these two avenues. Does the mentor then take that section and simply say, yeah, I'll do this? Or does the mentor then commit the time and the effort into explaining the methods that go into that particular section?
Rock, paper, scissors it out.
I'll start.
I see you on the edge, Janet.
I'm on the edge. I get that. Really good question, thank you.
Yeah.
And your name is?
Raphael.
Raphael. I think this is all driven by the end game. What is the goal? What is the goal especially of the undergraduate student? And why, in fact, did the mentor take on that undergraduate student? There needs to be communication, and both have to have a common purpose. Relative to a project or a deliverable, there's this dichotomy between, in this situation, teaching and learning, so teaching, the various steps, versus the student worker. And the student worker as a student worker can lead potentially to an abusive situation. And hopefully that's not what's happening. It's always in best practice, everyone's best interest also, to actually draft up what we might call an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, or a simple contract. Here's what I will do as the undergraduate student, here's what I will do as the mentor. At the end of the day, if we put these two things together, they sum to this net product.
I completely agree. I think context really matters, Raphael. If it's in the context of a class, then what the expectation of, or the degree of the pivot of the mentor to the undergraduate or graduate student for that matter, will be dictated by learning outcomes. It's a research project. I can't agree more. I think, again, to be super intentional around what is the project and what are the expectations of that. And in anticipation, so Janet, don't roll your eyes, but I did bring copies because this always comes up in these conversations. So I brought examples of one I've done and one, so you can pass them around. These are contracts. So one, you'll see my name, Watson, is a research team that I had organized in 2016. And then one is Schneider, and it's one of my more recent graduates. And what these are, it's their research contracts. So when you're meeting with your team and you're doing a project, I completely agree. You should establish who's the lead, what are the topics, and what is the expectation in terms of the lit review, the data collection, data analysis, and be super intentional and specific around authorship, and authorship as it relates to manuscripts versus presentations. because there are two separate things. Don't assume anything when you're working collaboratively. I encourage you not to assume anything.
I completely agree with both panelists, but I can only add one more thing. Communicating everything effectively is obviously the first and foremost point, clearly. But I think also setting realistic goals should be on the table, because again, if the undergrad student is not performing the assigned tasks, maybe that has to do with that. So being realistic.
If I may add, it seems that when working in a mentor-mentee relation between a professor and a graduate student, it's quite different
Yeah.
than with an undergraduate student. So for example, one of my previous co-authorships, essentially there's two specialists, we divide the labor.
Right.
The professor knows that I'm fairly well knowledgeable in this field, so there's complete trust, let's say, in the labor review or the methodological process or the interpretation. Whereas with the undergraduate, it's a total different relationship out there, because with the undergraduate, there's not necessarily that skill that has been rather concrete yet. It's still a working process.
I'll just add one plug for the graduate college along this conceptual line. A program that you all have an opportunity to apply to and participate in is the RAMP program, Research and Mentorship Program, which sets up this team. You've heard this term team consistently, of an undergraduate researcher, a graduate researcher, and a faculty mentor. And the flow is as such where the graduate student can serve in that junior mentor role for the undergrad, and of course the faculty member oversees the entire process. That's a neat concept, and if you pursue this and look into it in more detail, you'll see that the graduate college has specified very specific goals and expectations for people sitting in these various places, and what the outcomes should be for the entire program. So that's a neat model to follow or to refer to when you're looking at establishing criteria and end game goals.
Could you email those documents that you sent out?
I can. Who do I email them to?
So I
Megan?
believe there's a list.
Yes,
Right.
a sign-up sheet.
If you email, when Jennifer contacts you, you can email them to her, and she'll send them out to everyone.
Awesome.
Okay. I sure will. Good.
What has been more challenging for you to establish a mentor-mentee relationship?
I'm not going to start this one. I'll let you begin.
What has been the most challenging part of establishing?
First, it's a two-way street, right? Because you're in a relationship, professional relationship, and both parties should be actively participating, right? Because this is an ongoing conversation, if you will. So in that sense, if you cannot establish the roles correctly and explicitly, clearly, honestly from the outset, then you have a problem, right? Because obviously as a mentor, my role is to lead, right? To guide, to help, because I have a job, right? And you're the mentee, you are in this relationship, and you need to identify your role as the mentee. And it's usually a personality trait, because some people may take a very passive role, right, take a back seat, and then they don't participate actively in this. And then that can lead to other complicated issues, such as being passive aggressive, right, feeling hurt, feeling humiliated, defensive, right? Then it becomes a harder job for the mentor, because now you need to fix this, right? And you need to reestablish roles. You need to correct this. So I think that's, in my experience, this is the most challenging. I'm not saying this is a typical, scenario, but if and when you have personality traits that are prone to that, that could be a problem, and then it's a hard problem to fix sometimes.
Yeah. I think for me, the time management. Classes, research, service. You start the semester and you have your doc students or your students identify their goals, and everybody's got a timetable and everything's golden. You feel really great, and then midterm you look back and it's like, what the heck happened, right? Where'd you go? And where'd I go? So I think that's the hardest thing for me, is just time management, and by that, unpacking that would be managing consistent points of checking on projects and how you're doing, checking in, updating, but not in a way that's onerous to the student or to myself. So I think that balance for me is the most difficult.
I was thinking for myself, one of the greatest challenges sometimes is, we were talking about goals, but making sure that timelines are established, and then meeting those metrics, meeting those timelines, achieving those milestones. That can sometimes be very frustrating if a student is not progressing at a timely rate. And they can be frustrating because that might suggest that the student has some roadblocks that you haven't addressed. They could be frustrating relative to the fact that we have finite funding and we want to get you out the door while we can still support you. And it can be frustrating relative to, as Dr. Watson said, personal time management. So I think those are, kind of coupling all of this. I think we hit upon the things that we commonly share. And some situations are more intense than others. By that, situations with students, and that what's interesting on this campus is some units just accept graduate students who are already admitted to their programs, without any formal interviewing process, while others have an interviewing process. Our program does have an interviewing process, and actually a student has to have a mentor identified before they enter the program, which mitigates a lot of these potential roadblocks, because there's already some known communication relative to personalities and all those types of things. Sure.
May I add one thing? As you were talking, Janet, something else that is a frustration for me as a mentor is when I have a student that 1 month or one semester comes in and they're all about researching giraffes. I'll just be super general. Researching giraffes, and they're jazzed about it, and they put together this plan. And I'm like, yeah. And then in the spring, they're super jazzed about researching bears, right? And then I'm like, which is it? So as students, I think back to this whole notion of having a team and using your colleagues, your students, your peers to bounce ideas off, so that you don't fatigue your chairs. Just I'm giving some witness to the chairs and the advisors in the room, but just that can be really hard, because we don't know what to attend to or how to direct. And so, because you're supposed to be excited, we want you to be excited because we want you to finish, but like giraffe and bear, like mitigate that with colleagues and peers. That can be taxing.
I would take that giraffe and that bear and say they both have 4 legs. Let's do locomotion.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's good
yeah.
for here. That's good.
Other questions? Phil?
With regards to the relationship between a graduate student and a professor, how does one minimize, from the graduate student's point of view, how does one minimize possibilities of exploitation? So for example, the graduate student seeks a specific mentor in their field, a professor, not only for academic empowerment, but also to make their way through that network. Where the professor knows other individuals in higher education institutions, and for the graduate student to eventually be part of that network. In return, some professors may view graduate students as a workhorse. Essentially do most of the work, and then we'll co-author, and then I'll get my first name there. Or the first author is the professor. So in that sort of a relationship, it's clearly exploitative, in the sense that the first author is the professor, but the majority of the work is being provided by the graduate student. How does a graduate student mitigate that particular scenario?
I've been thinking a lot about that because of some of our pre-questions that we had. I think one of the pieces is we're talking all about the mentor and the mentee, and just thinking about that one-on-one communication. Remember, you have a committee, and those folks are part of your team. You do have a graduate coordinator, and you do have a department chair. And if in fact situations seem to be moving in the wrong direction of exploitation, by all means talk to people. seek input. It may be that a department chair might have to have a conversation with a faculty member who happens to be your mentor.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there are best practices, and exploitation is not one of them. Only if you like to mow lawns should you mow your mentor's lawn. Of course, most don't have lawns, right? And the water comes on automatically, so check that one off the list. But, you know, there are all of those bad stories of things like that that have happened historically, and, you know, certainly I would hope that our campus is not one that's friendly to those types of relationships, those types of exploitations. You know, it is competitive for you, and you know, in what you're trying to do, if you're in, especially if you're in a research track. Authorships are important, and you know, we've all been graduate students, and we've all been down that road where, what do? You go to classes, you of course do those types of things. If you're funded, you do your funded research, and then you live in the lab. Oh, occasionally you might eat or sleep, right? And maybe exercise. But it does have to be that balance, and I think one of the pieces is, if in fact you seem to be treading down that bad path, talk to others. I would not expect, don't take for granted anything that the mentor's behaviors will change unless there is need for the mentor to change, or it becomes obvious to the mentor. They may not know that they're, you know, that you're being treated, or you're perceived as being treated in that way. So communications are always good.
I agree. Even I think grad college may have some committees for this kind of careers, right?
Absolutely.
There's always a course, yeah.
So on the other side of that, how do you, as the mentor, balance the psychosocial needs of the student that you're mentoring with challenging them to move forward? Like, as students are going through life crises, like crises in life where it kind of conflicts with that original plan. How do you navigate that type of scenario?
Very carefully.
Yeah.
Let's start.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
You know, most students may think that, you know, mentors may have crystal balls. We don't. So, I mean, if you're going through a crisis in your life, how would I know, right? So that's why I'm going to go back to that again, constant, consistent communication. So you have to tell your mentor that, you know, whatever crisis you're experiencing in that point of time in your life, you have to explicitly, you know, communicate that so that your mentor has an idea. Otherwise, it's just we're flying in the solo in the darkness.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the C word, communication. I mean, that's, you don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not an emotional detective. That's what I like to tell my students. And so just tell me what's happening, because then we can plan for it. If you don't tell me, we can't make a plan for it. So communicating.
We're all humans. I think we understand. Most students don't understand that we understand.
I would just add, and it's nothing new, that, you know, life is sinusoidal, right? It's sinusoidal for us, it's sinusoidal for you as a student. And communicating those situations and those needs is really the key.
Yes. Like a step deeper, I guess. So I'm thinking through the perspective of like an undergraduate that I'm mentoring, and they come to you with that life crisis. How do you find, like, so you know about it, like the communication is there, but how do you approach them working with a student that is going through those things? Do you, I know that it's so specific to the actual scenario,
Sure.
but if you could share anything broadly about, you know, you have a student whose family just moved to a different country, and you can see that, you know, they want this, but their mind's over here, and they're trying to deal with those life situations. Like, how do you in a graceful way challenge them and make sure they still achieve what they want without putting too much burden onto them? I know that it's the communication thing, but say that the student's not communicating with you, you know what's going on, but past that, they're saying, I'm all right, like, I want to keep rolling. How do you balance that type of scenario?
You know, sometimes there are outside services that a student can be referred to, but yet the mentor's role, I believe, is one to try to really dig out if the student really, you gave the scenario, they say, yes, I want to keep going, I want to keep going. So maybe what you do is, you have a milestone, you have a benchmark, maybe that gets extended or that gets lowered a bit while you work through this piece. And just being compassionate is important as well.
Yeah. Goal setting again, maybe that specific goal is not realistic enough.
Right.
So, you may have to rescale. But I agree that, because again, as mentor, we want to be there to help our mentee, but I'm not professional and I'm not equipped with professional tools to deal with, say, serious like emotional distress and things like that. But I would refer them to,
Camps.
yeah, on-campus resources.
And I think too, probably just one other small piece would be, for me, understanding what policies are in place for me to encourage the student towards. So if students are having a difficult time, then to have the conversation around, is it maybe a leave of absence, because that's a policy that holds your academic clock in place, so you're not accruing time, and it gives you an opportunity to take some time away from class. So for me as a mentor, being aware of what the procedures and policies are on campus and then inviting that into the conversation. And doing so, I think, to echo my colleagues, in a manner that is not accusatory or you've now become less than because you're going to focus on another part of who you are, but rather as part of an extended piece of your academic self. So.
My name's Joe McKay. I'm a third-year PhD student in Hotel College. I have a three-part question for you. First of all, who was the most significant mentor in your life, or an example of one, and why were they significant? The second part. And the third part, how did you show gratitude to your mentors?
Joe, say that one more time. Who?
Like a significant mentor,
Mhm.
one. Two, why were they significant? And three, how did you show them gratitude?
I'll take that one on because I have a very different answer.
Okay.
And it's going to move away from academics. My most significant mentor in my life was my father. Why? Because I learned a work ethic from him. And obvious ways to show gratitude, I was his loving daughter. So that moves away from academics, but that's molded me so much. Obviously, I have an academic mentor as well, but I thought that would be your standard answer, right? And I also have kind of a strange background relative to my academic mentor. That would take way too long to explain. So I think that's my best piece, because that flowed over into the rest of my life as well.
I'm going to give you the standard answer.
That's fine.
My academic mentor, I have a hard time articulating to thank him enough, and we still talk. That's, like I said before, it's a lifelong relationship. So I was an international student, came here, and I was also married. So, like immigration issues, and also after I moved to the United States, September 11 happened, right? Actually, it was the first day of school for me, 9/11, 2001, first day of grad school. So really challenging times, so my mentor was there for me, dealing with all those emotions, uncertainties, unknowns, all the anxiety associated with all of these things, like a huge hot mess, right? And then he never ceased to actually step up to the plate. I earned my degree, I landed a job, and anytime I felt like, what do I do now? Like Richard, help me. And even to this day, I pick the phone and I call him if I need advice. So that's why it's precious to have a mentor, right? There's a lot. When we had our baby, he helped with helped with my spouse's employment. I mean, literally, he went above and beyond to make sure that I was on the right track. I could focus on what I had to do, and I could just deliver, and I did, and I owe him big time.
Joe, colleagues, I would say for me, I'm gonna go with academic also, and I think for me it would be my former chair. My first academic appointment was University of Utah, College of Health Sciences. And at the time, you might know, Pat Eisenman, she was a full professor in the department, and I remember coming in and you're excited, and I was like all young, and she was very clear. She is a no-nonsense person. I love her to death. We talk still to this day. And what she was good about was unpacking why do you want to do this? What is your end goal? And so she was always really good about directing me in really clear, concise ways, fairly unemotional, which was good, right, for me. And I think how I showed her my gratitude, and she would say this, was get tenure, Watson. That was it. Like, I don't need anything, get tenure. And I did. And you know what's funny is, so we have come full circle. So she retired from the U 2 years ago. And I'm very close with her daughter. She comes down here all the time, Las Vegas. But Pat, Dr. E, I still call her Dr. E, she calls me and she calls me Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson, I'm retiring and I know you travel in the summers. Can I put in with you on some trips? Because I want to learn how to take some time off. And so it's kind of cool because it's come full circle. So I think that's the greatest ways is say thank you, finish, and just be great. Great question. Thank you.
Very good.
I agree. Being successful, that's the best gratitude, right? Because they're proud of you.
Yeah,
Reflect very positively on them.
yeah. And to like turn it back, because that was one of the questions, like what do we expect as mentors from our students? And
Oh, yeah.
I was like,
There's the
you just say thank you, right? Get your shit done.
This is being recorded, Watson.
I know, sorry. Get your stuff done, meet your timelines.
and gift cards, right?
and-
Starbucks $500 gift cards.
No, just finish. Like, get your degree, finish. That's like the biggest thank you to me, finish. And then every once in a while, stay in contact. I still get, and I'm sure you both do as well, I get emails. It's funny, there's trends
Yeah.
at the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year. Hey, Dr. Watson, just letting you know, master students who are in doc programs, doc students. I got a doc student now that's an associate dean at a college, my first student. Old, but like, be great. That's the best thing ever. Yeah, that's the best thing ever.
So it's fairly common for researchers not to always see eye to eye. So what's kind of the best way to approach, maybe if you or a mentee and a mentor aren't necessarily seeing eye to eye on something, which is sometimes a good thing, but what's the best way to approach that? Because there is a power kind of dynamic there.
5149. And it all goes back to communication, and maybe it's not the best fit. In academics, you'll find that there are often dichotomous views on everything from statistical design to whatever, and that's kind of the challenge sometimes in publishing. So there can be some compromise. Hopefully the mentor is open enough to listen to an alternative viewpoint. Again, go back to committee and discuss. Certainly, there's not just the one chair, or I won't use the term advisor, I'll use mentor, and committee members. And the idea of a committee that is formed around a student is to support that student. And some give and take might be the best way. So if you like this or like this, maybe you end up like this. 5149.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, because I've had this happen, I'm sure you both have, a student, and what I've elected to do is set ground rules for how we communicate or how we argue, because there's a lot of benefit to that. Hopefully you'll have an opportunity to be on a research team, but you're learning your collegiality and you're learning who you are now There's no bell that goes off at the point that you've made or you've reached this thing, right? Because you're continually doing this. So thinking about how you're developing skills in that scenario. And so sometimes taking a step back, I'm a big step backer if you can't tell, but taking a couple steps back and saying, okay, how are we communicating? What are our ground rules? And then there's a point at which you're going to have to agree to disagree. And given where the power lies, at what point in your career, you may have to let some stuff go more than you would want. But you also have to identify what are your deal breakers too, right? Because you have rights too. And you have a right to be heard. And so identifying what your deal breakers are and being willing to be accountable for that, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I apologize if that sounded really condescending as it just came out of my mouth. I didn't mean it that way, but you have rights.
I see this as a personnel issue because, in my view, I mean, I can't picture a scenario in which a scientist will not consider an alternative point of view, right? So that is dogmatic if you impose on others and say, like, this is the only right way to approach it. So, again, it's your task to gauge the scenario and also look at the personnel, like your mentor, your professor, or your co-author. I mean, if there's a huge ego in the room, obviously that's a different scenario. You may have to work around it because, you're right, there are asymmetrical power relationships. But I personally would welcome, a mentee who would challenge my ideas, and I would be very proud of that, right? Because again, science, right, operate based on that premise, right? I say, you say, I say, you say. It's an ongoing dialogue, right? Challenging, competing ideas, that dichotomies, binaries, that what drives knowledge. So I think, like I said, it's a personality issue. You have to be careful. So, by and large.
I think it's one of the wonkiest relationships you will have professionally, and maybe personally, I don't know, but because there's this narrative of you will engage in independent research, right, as you become born, evolve as a doctoral student, but you get to do this with 4 other people having to agree on what you're doing and when you're doing it and how you're doing it with that oversight. So it's I think just kind of, let's put that out there, and it's how independent it is. Let's talk through that. So in some ways, it just kind of releases some of that energy, and it can release some of that dodgy expectation stuff, and it can, I feel like it can potentially create space for dialogue that wouldn't happen otherwise. Like, how independent is this, Dr. Watson, if you're telling me, right? And I think sometimes we need to get over ourselves as professors or as mentors. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
I think it would be also wise to invite back the idea of communicating and discussing the roles, like authorship roles, explicitly from the onset, so that you don't end up in those situations. Because from the outset, if you discuss those and if you identify your role, then things may be more amenable. Maybe.
We've been talking about, the specifics about mentor-mentee relationships. I think everybody in this room understands that this is one of the most important decisions that you make as a graduate student, identifying and working with your mentor. Because as you've heard, it does become a lifelong relationship, and if you choose wisely, right, or if you're successful. So, I can't impress upon enough how important that match is, and the decision that you make in, you accept a mentor just like a mentor accepts a mentee. I mean, it's that two-way street.
I have a question. I've been trying to figure out how to frame this delicately, and I don't know if there's a way to do it, so I'm just going to try and throw it out there. How, if you're in like an informal mentor-mentee relationship, right? So it's not like a graduate student who has chosen you and you've accepted them with an interview or whatever. How do you navigate that when it's just a straight interpersonal miss? Like, what if you don't like your mentee? And that's why I'm trying to figure figure out, I'm not talking about my mentee, but like if you have like it's just a miss and it's a frustrating relationship and they're looking to you for guidance, but you find yourself not super invested in providing it, but you feel like you need to and you want to do a good job. Has that ever happened? How do you deal with that in a professional, respectful way?
So I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you speaking from the mentee or mentor?
I'm speaking from the mentor point
Okay.
of view. Yeah.
From the mentor who has taken a student and then they just miss? Or,
No, it's more like informal. Like I oversee like 6 or 7 undergraduates,
Okay.
Informally.
Okay.
And there's just one that we just miss. Like it's
Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
working out well. It's not a formal thing. But
I ain't saying that.
Right, okay,
It happens,
okay,
right?
yeah.
yeah, I'm thinking of situations where there might be, and this is more on the pedagogy side, where there's an instructor who has several lab TAs or something like that.
Yeah.
And maybe the cadre of them are, the lab TAs are working out, and one there's just a great big miss. What do? You reassign them. And if you can't, there's always that thing called peer advising, where, students talk to students, and students should talk to students. And students learn from students maybe as much, if not more, than they learn from their mentor. And if there's a situation where we have a team, okay, let me take it out of the lab, where we have a team, a research team that consists of a mentor and several graduate students, and one of those graduate students isn't pulling their weight, you know what's gonna happen? That's gonna sour that team. And somebody somewhere along the line is gonna do something to either shake that person up or that person is going to leave that team. So there's the team member pressure, the peer pressure, and there's also the obvious communication of, hey, you're not pulling your weight, especially if you're a lab TA, this is your job, we're paying you for this. Just some ideas, I don't know, it's a tough thing, it's a tough thing. I will say I've had that happen, and it was because it never would have happened had there not been life challenges, which was a medical situation for this particular student, which, I was observing students spiraling, and I was also observing my team being demoralized. So the alternative approach of suggesting a leave of absence was, the first course of action, and then we worked through some things and things happened. But, those types of situations can affect not only the single person and the mentor, but, the team as well.
Yeah, do you feel like it's impacting the dynamic of the group?
Not really. I think it's like a maturity issue, and I am not sure that it's my role, nor am I sure that I'm willing to be the person that teaches this person how to behave in life. Like, is that in like an informal relationship? Is that my role? Like, how do you have that conversation?
And again, it's the bigger piece, what's the investment?
Right.
If this is going to go on for years, then it's probably worth that investment. In an informal way, it could be a casual conversation that, hey, whatever.
Actually, this question is a nice segue into one of the questions that we had, like Kent. What's an appropriate way to end a mentor-mentee relationship, right? What's the most professional way to let your advisor know that you would no longer want to work with them? Question number 5. Maybe we can actually transition to that. And obviously, like in every relationship, professional relationship, if it's no longer working, if it's no longer beneficial to the mentee, especially because it's all about the mentee, that relationship should end, right? And I think the key is gratitude. Right? It should end gracefully, right? And I know it's a hard conversation, right? How do you go to your mentor and say, like, sorry, it's not working? But I think it's inevitable. And I think it's also, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, if one of my students came to me saying that, I'm no longer getting anything out of this relationship, I would be okay with that. But obviously, it's all about the way you bring this up, and it should be you should be assertive, right? Clearly and explicitly define what is happening, what is the direction you're taking, why is it no longer working, and instead of saying, hey, you're not doing X, Y, Z, right? Instead of doing that, say, hey, I envision going into this direction and I thrive to develop in these areas. So place the emphasis on your professional development, career development, and your need to actually change direction and gracefully. And I think
that last point is key, and that's what I was going to add. Have a plan.
Yeah.
Have a plan, an alternative plan. And then just another side point is pick the right day. Because mentors have good days and bad days. So if they have a bad day and you're trying to have this conversation, don't go there. Have your pocket question that you slip in instead. I mean, that's reality, that's life. But.
Yeah.
Oh.
Would you help that student find another mentor? Like, would you continue to help that student, like, establish some security? And like, if they're a graduate student, for example, and they came up to you and they wanted to end that relationship, would it, like, how would that
That's
work?
that's a real good question. I think it depends, the research area and the ties to, or how close you are. I mean, I could think of situations in our academic unit where it may be that person is not with the right mentor and say, I think you really could learn more from this situation, or it might be a better match. And I would certainly facilitate that if I saw that to be a win for the student. There may be situations, however, where the student wants to jump academic units, in which case you as the mentor may not be as familiar, or maybe you are. Right. And you can help guide. I think I think you'll see varying degrees of response from various mentors, depending how emotionally distraught they are, and also depending upon how much time they've invested in the student to this point. If it's a first semester, second semester student, probably, whatever. If it's a second, third year, as you stated, this isn't had for us, and doctoral students are a great investment of time. For you as a doctoral student, you're investing great time, but your mentors are, doing this out of love for the academy, and for advancing science. And it's not about the time clock and the paycheck, because believe me, there's not an equality there. So I think it varies. That's my response.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it does. It really does. My response, because I've had, the most important thing is that you all finish. I hope I've get that one. And so whatever is the best course for you to take, and the faculty that in my program here and when I was at Utah, we had an understanding among the program faculty that if the student isn't working well, they can move, right? They get to choose at a certain point. But to your point, Janet, I think that's what's really difficult is, and I have had this happen, there's a disagreement with a student around a method or a question, and I've had it happen once or twice in my 10, 20-year career where the student has left or went to another advisor, and you're at post-proposal. That's tough. That's tough. And so it's like it calls on my integrity as a professional to be gracious, gnash my teeth in my room where nobody can see me, and move forward. Because in the end, that's the question that always comes back to us, or back to me anyway, is the student's going to finish. And I got you to third base, and somebody's got to bring it home. Damn it, anyway. There it is again. But it's tough. But it is our responsibility professionally to still support the student and to not cause strife. But it's tough. So, yeah.
And I'll reiterate, be gracious, be honest, and be transparent about your plans when you have these conversations.
Yeah.
And don't burn bridges, because you never know when you're going to encounter this person in any capacity, right, as a boss, or, you never know, or in a different capacity.
There's that ubiquitous reference
Yeah.
letter, right?
So you don't want to.
Yeah.
Jeanette Barber. I'm in the first year of my PhD program, and I wonder about non-content or discipline-specific skills and competencies that you might try to grow in your mentees, like metacognition, self-regulation, those types of things.
So are you asking a question about life skills?
Maybe, yeah.
That's part of the package.
Mhm.
We've been talking a lot about setting goals and milestones and all that. I'm not gonna do that for you. You know, so that's, you know, it may be, okay, you draft this, so you're talking about life skills, plans, being realistic. And if you come back with a plan that's unrealistic, either too aggressive or too slow, you know, that's where we step in. So that might be one piece that, you know, I don't know that it would be necessary to take you as a first semester, second semester coming up as you enroll doc student and send you across campus to a meta skills class. So, you know, I think that can be built in, or conceptual thought processes. You know, that's, to me, that's part of the mentoring process, but others might have other comments.
Are there like specific or explicit skills besides the ones that you mentioned that you intentionally try to instill in your mentees that you think are important?
I usually talk about intangibles, like social skills,
Yeah.
because when I first started as an assistant professor, one of the challenges that I had faced was like, how do you navigate in a very rugged socio-political terrain, right? It's not because you do your stuff, you can publish, you don't, because you're trained, but those human skills, people skills, and not everybody will have them. So, you know, you're gonna have to develop them. It takes time. So you can't just teach somebody to be politically savvy, right, or sharp, or read between lines, or when to talk, or when to observe, or, you know, or when to pick a battle. So these are all skills, you know, you can teach them. Sometimes people like observe and learn from others' mistakes. Sometimes they need to jump in and they need to burn and damage, and then they learn that way. So it's also personal. I think this is, but I usually talk with my students a lot about intangibles, you know, because everybody will know there's a grad catalog, right? How many credits, what to do, timelines, you know that stuff, right? But how to build relationships, how to avoid sticky situations, when to say no, when to say pass, when to say I'm not going to pick this battle, it's not worth it. I talk about these things, but again, like, this is not, it's not like, it's not a 50-minute lesson, right?
No, I think the mentor relationship and mentee relationship in particular is valuable for that because it's an intimate relationship over a
Absolutely.
long period of time.
There's another intangible is professional attire. You know, when you're representing your academic unit or your university, you know, sometimes some younger students aren't socially skilled in something like that. I mean, I think of some professional academic conferences that I go to that are related to exercise, and even, you know, folks are in shorts and polo shirts, you know? And I remember as a student when I first saw that, I thought, that's really strange. But I guess I was accepted at that point. I just wasn't cultured that way. I have heard stories the opposite, where students go out and, not being cultured professionally, do not present themselves well professionally. And their mentor and their colleagues, their peers sometimes are embarrassed for them. And that's another one of the soft skills, those life skills.
Etiquette too, right?
Etiquette,
and
absolutely.
that would be discipline
Absolutely.
specific. For example, you know, I'm an archaeologist, and this would be very professional, right, in professional settings. But obviously, if you're in a business school, right, you would have to look like really sharp and business attire. So you'll learn those things by immersion.
Other questions or comments or anything? Do we have anything else to say?
I'm looking at our questions. Making sure.
You've already addressed a couple of the questions here.
If two advise, number 4. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, as a mentee looking for a mentor, what kind of interactions would you recommend that the mentee have with various people to figure out if that person is going to be a good fit? So should they take them to coffee? Should they attend their classes? What kinds of interactions?
It's a good question. Great question. Okay, so it depends if it's, for example, an undergraduate on campus who's seeking a mentor on campus for graduate school, or if it's someone off location. So I'll take the traditional, start with the traditional, which is someone off location. First thing would be to do your homework as a student. You know where your interests lie. Learn about the academic expertise of the various faculty. That's the first step. And then engage the communications. Typically in this age, the initial step is an outreach with typically an email. Introducing yourself and your interests, and if the faculty member or the potential faculty member might have time for a conversation, or if in fact they're even taking graduate students. That's an important piece as well. What you might learn is I found this perfect mentor, potential mentor, would be a great fit match, but that person's not taking another student for 2 more years. And whether you can work in that time period or not, that's the first thing I would throw out. Other pieces?
I would look at the general picture first. I mean, you even have to look at for example, if there's a school or department, I would go and look at their website and try to kind of gauge it and look at the cues to kind of parse the culture in that unit. For example, if you look at a department website and if you see if there are sub-disciplines and if that department is organized into sub-disciplines, that tells you one thing, right? Or if professors are listed on the website by rank, that tells it, that might be a hierarchical place, right? Assistant professor, associate. For example, in my department, if you look at our website, it's alphabetical, okay? And not disciplinary, right? So you see that, we're not in silos, and, we're not a very hierarchical place. So you can actually kind of read the department culture. Then your interaction with the potential mentor or mentee will also give you a lot of hints. For example, if you email somebody and if you don't hear back like in 3 weeks, right, that tells you something. If you email a professor and you hear within the first 24 hours, that tells you something. Or also look at the nature of the response. If it's generic, oh sure, cool, thanks for contacting me. Yeah, please, do apply. That's one thing. But then if there are more, if there's a more personal approach with more customized, right, interest, that tells you that person might be really the right fit for you. So I would look at a number of different things to try to gauge the situation and read the culture of the institution, department, and also the attitude of the professor, right? And it's two-way street, same thing. Sometimes students reach out to you, you respond, and then you say could you please send me your CV? Then 3 weeks later, here you go, my CV. Really? Okay, thank you. Right? Things like that.
And it's 2 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, or I say how about a phone interview, and then you don't hear back. So it tells you that is all it tells you.
Yeah, and I think for me what's helpful is when an individual reaches out, and it's usually via email, that you let me know what it is you're looking for. So I'm interested in either you serving on my committee, or I want to bounce ideas off of you. So the more concrete you can be in the entree, when you're reaching out, I think the more helpful it is for mentors. And then I think I would just echo what my colleagues have said. Do your homework. Know who you're contacting and how they might fit. So again, that goes back to what we originally started with. What are you looking for? What is it that you want from this person? And so being super intentional. Is it, are you reaching out to Dr. Dufek because you want to have her assist in helping you build a network in health sciences, and because you know she's the associate editor of one of the top tier journals in that area, and her work resonates with you, but it's not your work, but she could be somebody that you talk with. Talk to her about that. So just know who you're reaching out to and what they might be able to provide. Yeah.
I have one more piece to add to that. If at all possible, try to connect with or learn who the current doctorals or current graduate students are that are working under the mentor.
That's
Get in
right.
touch with
Great
them,
idea.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's where you're gonna learn really what it's like.
Yeah.
Campus visits, that's a great idea too,
Yeah.
phone interviews. And I will add one more thing, because we usually talk about mentors in singularity, but I would like to reemphasize the importance of identifying a committee. Because I had a committee of 3 professors, and they all had like strengths in different areas, and I just capitalized on that, right? Like, for example, my primary mentor read every single line, every single word, right? And I gave me feedback. The second committee member, he never read anything. He didn't have time. He would say, "Oh, excellent, great, perfect," but he had other areas in which I could receive constant support and assistance. And the third one helped me develop teaching skills, because I was his TF for 3 years, and then it opened up other doors. See, I mean, I kind of like, just took advantage of all those pockets of excellence in 3 different, faculty advisors or mentors. So don't think, you have to commit to one person.
I have a question. When I listen to what you say, it makes me realize that I think I need a little more information on what exactly is the function of the committee, because I thought that it was just like to oversee and check and ensure a certain standard more than taking you through the process. So could anyone elaborate on the actual
Sure.
function so you can know how to?
Committee composition varies slightly across campus, but there's one common piece. You will have a mentor, and you will likely have 2 or more other faculty that have some content expertise that can
Content.
augment. But then the commonality across campus is there is one member who may or may not know anything about what you're doing academically. Their role is to oversee and assure that graduate college rules and regulations are being followed. Their role is also to assure appropriate rigor at the expense of abuse of the student. So they have a very, very important role to play. And they may or may not know anything about the content itself. So that committee consists of people who can help drive your research forward, and they understand your research, or at
It's
least
like a
aspects
witness,
of it.
right?
Pardon?
Almost like a witness.
Oh, like a witness, yeah.
Yeah.
And one of those people may be
Mhm.
simply a statistician, and I don't mean
Right.
simply, I mean their role may be in your statistical design and not in the content question, but they're still a critical piece. But then there is that other important grad college rep that serves the role to protect the student, and to assure that there is enough rigor that, they're not just, that you're earning a degree of value.
Yeah, I would encourage you all to take time, if you haven't, and to revisit it periodically throughout your programs, the policies that are associated with the grad college and your departmental handbook. Each department should have a graduate student handbook. So be familiar, because again, those are your rights.
Along the lines of the handbook, just a technicality, you enter under the catalog of your first semester enrollment. As catalogs and programs, handbooks evolve, you may always choose to adopt the most current, but you can't go backwards. Yeah. else? Well, there are cookies up here, you know, I'm hoarding them, right? So thanks a lot for your participation and attendance. And if you have any other further questions that you didn't want to ask the group, catch any of us here before we skedaddle at the door. Hopefully this was useful for you. I've enjoyed my time here. I've enjoyed the insight of my colleagues as well. Thank Meg for setting this up.
Thank you all.
And
Thank you.
I hope you've all signed in, right? Okay, great. Thanks. Could you send me those documents also? Sam, could you send me your documents also?
Yes, so I'll send, and I also brought 2 copies, and I'll give this out, but I'll also send it electronically. Making the Most of Mentors, a guide for mentees. Oh, so timely. So there's 2 copies there, but I'll also send it out via email. Yeah.
Great.
All right, great. Thanks, I think that went very well.
Yeah, thank you.
That's fine.
What's up, buddy?